Thank you all so much for joining us. It looks like we have a strong turnout for this one, which is exciting. You know, I think service charges are just kind of top of mind for so many operators and markets throughout the country right now. So really kind of excited to dig into this topic with you all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrea Borgan-Abdallah, she, her pronouns. I am an ex-restaurant owner and had been a Raise member for most of the 6 years that I owned my restaurant in Los Angeles. I now support the Raise team and our restaurant owner members with support, programming, resources, lots of wage model trainings and things kind of that nature. If you're not familiar with Raise, we are a subsidiary of One Fair Wage. And so in addition to kind of supporting that organization with its policy work and moving to eliminate the tipped minimum wage nationwide, are just kind of a coalition of restaurant owners who really want to see change in our industry and want to improve wages and benefits and chart a better, more sustainable path for ourselves and for our employees. So really excited to welcome you all to this call. And I am going to let our panelists introduce themselves. Oh, actually, and before that, if you can also introduce yourself in the chat. Please share your name, your restaurant, and your location. I'd really appreciate it so we all kind of see where everyone is tuning in from. And I'm going to go ahead and let Rachel introduce herself. You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm in vacation brain. Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're coming from. My name is Rachel Miller Munzer. I am a co-owner of 3 restaurant concepts in the Boston area. Mamala's Jewish Delicatessen, which is quick service now, Vincent's, which is a neighborhood bistro, full service, and State Park, which is a neighborhood bar concept. And anything else? Great.
Shelley.
Hi, I'm Shelley Armistead, partner and CEO of the Gjelina Group, primarily based in Venice Beach and more recently in Manhattan, New York.
Hi, Adam Orman. I own Locadoro in Austin, Texas. Open for 7 years. We're opening Bambino Pizza later this year, and as one of the members of Good Work Austin, a collaborative of restaurants and bars in Austin, in Central Texas, we're opening the Good Work Austin Cafe next year, which will be a nonprofit workforce cleaning.
All right, and so kind of the format of this call, we're going to have sort of a Q&A with the panelists, and then definitely leave time and room for questions at the end. I have also implemented this kind of Q&A feature that folks can, you know, as questions arise throughout the call, can go ahead and sort of input things there. I've never used it before, so please bear with me. If things are kind of more timely, I'll try and address them in the moment. Otherwise, we might just try to save some of them for the very end. But, you know, kind of in terms of this conversation, you know, I think we're approaching it with sort of the sense that everyone who's joining us is an operator, is kind of familiar with the idea of service charges. And so really want to kind of try and leave room in this call to get into more just like the nuts, bolts, how are they implemented, what's working, what's not working, what could be done better. But just to kind of quickly like set it up, you know, for the purposes of this call, when we talk about service charges, we're generally talking about, you know, something between 15 to 20%, generally a mandatory service charge that restaurants are assessing on their bill, which then becomes restaurant revenue. And because it's restaurant revenue, restaurants sort of have the ability to distribute that how they see fit. And so oftentimes kind of what we see, there's sort of 2 ends of the spectrum. Either that service charge is being distributed in lieu of tips on top of a base wage, or it's being distributed as just a higher flat wage across the board. And then there's kind of all kinds of room for interpretation in between. And, you know, I think as far as our organization is concerned, and as far as this conversation is concerned, you know, I think there are really kind of two main goals when it comes to assessing a service charge. You know, I think we're looking to move away from a reliance on tipping as a principal means of compensating employees, and really kind of taking back some of that power and control and not leaving it at the whim of our guests, and trying to get our employees towards a real living wage that's a little bit more stable and predictable and sustainable. And then I think also, you know, improving the equity of the restaurant, especially as it is concerns both kind of kitchen and wait staff and upward mobility, and our ability to really create opportunities for our employees and help them learn and grow and improve the sort of state of our restaurant. So to kind of kick off this conversation, you know, I want to sort of get a little bit more context about, you know, part of the reason that we kind of picked these three panelists. They're all in very different markets with very different labor laws, and things to kind of consider. So want to sort of contextualize a bit what's sort of true for each of you in your different restaurants and your different models and in your different locations. So Rachel, I'll start with you again. So if you can kind of tell us or remind us where you're located, kind of current minimum wage laws, and then tell us a little bit about how you implement your service charge model, and kind of what that means for your employees. And then we can kind of go round robin, I think, go Rachel, Shelley, Adam, and answering these questions.
Terrific. So again, we're in Cambridge, Boston, Massachusetts. Of course, I didn't get the exact minimum wage, but there is a sub-minimum wage of somewhere around $6.75, somewhere between $6.75 and $7 an hour right now. And we just hit a $15 minimum wage, which had been tiered up, and we're at the end of that like 5-year tier. So there's now a $15 minimum wage in Massachusetts. We have a couple, something that sets us apart from the rest of the country other than New York, which is that we don't have the ability to share tips between front and back of the house. That was something that is federally acceptable, but New York and Massachusetts have laws that prohibit it. In our restaurants, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have 3 sort of varied concepts, so it's been really challenging in figuring out what the right thing to do is. But what we currently have as systems that are still very much in process is at Vincent's and State Park, which are the bar and the neighborhood bistro full service restaurants. We add on a 20%, what we now call a fair wage surcharge. That money gets pooled up, and over the 2-week pay period gets distributed by the hourly to every employee. And across the board at our 3 concepts, we do not pay a tip minimum wage. Everybody's guaranteed $17 an hour. I think almost nobody in the company makes that much. Everybody's at least at $17.50, $18 and up. And then at Mamala's, we've about a year ago, we shifted to a new concept, which is we're taking the fair wage surcharge in as income and just paying everybody flat higher wages. So again, starting at $17 an hour and moving up to around 22, 23. And there were a number of reasons for that, but among them was it wasn't sustainable for the business to not pay the sub-minimum wage, to pay a full minimum wage and try to pay everybody as much as we could possibly pay them and do everything that we're doing and try to make it all work. So this is a way to simplify that. We're taking it in, the money's going to wages, it's just not going directly out. And again, we do have to pay, we do have to record that as income. I think that's the overview.
Hi, so I can start, if I start with California, because there's just a little bit more historical data for us. We've been in New York far Less. So California 2016 into Gjelina, we started adding a mandatory service charge. The reason why we did it was because at that point, state of California did not consider everybody in the chain of service. And what we elected to do was anything left over and above the 20% in terms of tips or gratuities, the front distributed amongst themselves, front of house or floor. And we've kept that same system since 2016, even though the law changed in 2018, reason being the 20% mandatory service charge is just a more reliable source of income. Being on a tipped pool model, the percentage varies based on time of year, how many visitors we're getting from other countries. The average was considerably lower. When we looked at it across a 24-month period, the average was considerably lower than 20%. So introducing it into Gjelina, we guaranteed the front staff at that point the percentage that they were actually making and gave the differential to the kitchen. And then over between 2016 and now, we've incrementally moved the percentages more towards the back of house through conversation with our team, but also through shutdown and reopen during COVID. During COVID, we added a 15% service charge to go models, Juicer and Gjelina Takeaway, and we're able to come in at a much higher percentage split on the get-go because it was being introduced as something new as part of a reopening post-COVID or during COVID, rather than something that we were having to re-educate an entire team. And now every employee who comes on board since then knows that that is what they're signing up to, and that percentage is focusing on swaying a larger balance towards kitchen. Minimum wage is $16.04. I don't know if we're at that point to discuss actual numbers yet. That's still coming. No?
No, please go for it.
Okay, so it's quite easy. Our goal, just to be super clear, our goal is to get to 50-50, and it has to be incremental as a balance. I'm sure you understand as operators to be able to keep the floor team that have been used to a specific earning, to honor that, to not want to disrupt their lives too much while at the same time incrementally moving it over. And we've been able to consistently do that. So what we're looking at just in terms of MSC distribution is anywhere from $6 on top of their hourly rate for back of house as an average to $25 as an average for front of house on top of their hourly rate. The hourly rates are different. Front tend to all be on minimum wage. Back of house tend to have varied rates starting at around $18 an hour and up. So the differential is probably about $12 an hour difference when you take into account their actual hourly rate plus MSC versus the radical difference before. And it was certainly hugely swayed the other way before we did it. And then to-go models can be anywhere from like $5 additional and $20 additional. It's not quite as much as Gjelina, which is a bit more full service. New York, unfortunately, we've been unable to implement the system. We certainly honor the $15 an hour minimum wage plus tips for any of our tipped employees who have access to it. I just think that what California allows is the sort of move to more equality. It's a lot more of a human process, but also puts so much more ownership and onus on the operators to take responsibility for performance and behaviors. And it's great relief to know that the majority of somebody's earnings doesn't come from somebody's subjective view of them. It's actually the responsibility of the operator to ensure continual growth of that employee and positive participation. So that's the difference. And I know I've just covered like a bunch of topics in one, but that's what I'm finding stepping into two different states.
Go ahead. Okay. So Texas is a $2.13 an hour state. in 2016 with paying everybody at least $8 an hour, including at the time 18% service charge in years. But we have much less. We have many fewer obstacles coming from the state, and mostly it's just from the culture and being in a place where service charges were not done. There were no service charges. There were not many restaurants that were doing anything to create more equity between kitchen and service. So I'd say that the struggles with employees and guests are much more significant than the struggles that we've had trying to figure out the laws. Like in New York, we can share, as long as we're paying over the federal minimum wage, we've been able to share the service charge and any additional tips with anybody in the restaurant. We include a 20% service charge. Everybody starts at least $15 an hour. And the percentage that goes to the kitchen has increased considerably. So the goal by the end of this year, and this has a lot to do with opening a counter service pizza spot, was to get everybody to just an even higher hourly that will be subsidized by that's aided by the service charge, and then any additional tips will be split. Just the additional tips will get split between the kitchen and service staff. So by the time we implement that, everyone in the restaurant will be making somewhere between $20 and $30 an hour as their actual hourly, and then additional tips on top of that. Now, just so you have some for context, in Austin, that's really good. That's good for cooks. I think that other casual fine dining restaurants are probably in that same world, in the low 20s. Rate for servers. To have servers in the high, it'll be okay at the counter at the pizza place, but at our restaurant to have servers in the high 20s means they're probably at least $4 to $5 an hour lower than other similar restaurants, and maybe even as much as $10 to $15 lower than others. And there, I think we'll talk about this a bit later. There are a number of things that we try and do to make up for that. Since we've been doing this since we opened, we've always run a labor cost closer to 30%, usually more like 32%, and have just been built around that, knowing that we were, and we've just built around that. We have about between 30 and 35 employees. And we make, and the restaurant nets somewhere just south of, somewhere in the $1.8 million. So not whatever that means to you. 120 feet, and I think those are the specs.
Yeah, you are breaking up just a little bit, Adam, just so you know. But I think I might kind of transition into this next question with you, just because I know you're the only panelist who really opened their restaurant with this model already in place. You didn't transition, you've been doing it since day one, but I also know that it's evolved over time as you kind of navigated all of the things that we navigate and the things that change and the pandemic and the rest of it. Can you maybe talk just a little bit about things that you've learned along the way, or things that used to work and maybe don't work anymore, or kind of why you've made some of the changes that you've made?
Yeah, and if I'm breaking up a lot, let me know, and I can change network. I mean, messaging. from the job post through the interview, we mention this all the time, and I think so we mention it, we talk about it more than we ever thought we would have to. We talk about it in the press, it's on the menus, it's on our receipts in pretty succinct ways. I don't think that, but we definitely point it out. It gets highlighted on the receipt, and the servers are prepared to, the servers should be prepared. I think the way that it's changed, not only how much we talk about it, but the way we talk about it, is that there was a time that we talked about that we kind of approached servers saying, you know, if this isn't what you want to be a part of, by all means, go, no judgment, go work anywhere else, because no one else is doing this, and you're free to not put up with our shit. And I think that has changed a lot now that we have a little more confidence in who we are. This crusade, it is not about any individual here making as much as they can possibly make. If the restaurant makes more, then everybody makes more. The dishwashers are going to make more, and the servers are going to make more. So like Valentine's week, we're going to be busier, and you're going to make more, but you're not going to make, you know, as a server, you are not going to make all the more, and neither am I. And we do quarterly. We open the books quarterly to go, and it's not mandatory. It's for whoever wants to show up, and do that. But then there's other benefits that we've added every time we've been able to afford to. But I think being the level of transparency that is required has. I think that bar keeps moving. I think that there keeps being more, that there's always more that we can do, and every time we can either afford we do, and that's just because we keep there continue to be new young servers or new young cooks. It's principally folks on the service side who will have questions and issues with how we do things, and need more explanation, or there needs to be more work to get them to buy in. We've just been able to we've continued to have to figure out ways to I don't want to just say explain again, but to open up the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least in my conversations with restaurant owners across the country, we're, especially post-pandemic, as all these folks have left our industry and I think aren't coming back, we have this whole new sort of demographic of employees who are coming in for the first time ever, and not only need a lot of education, but want it, which I think is really exciting too. I think it's an opportunity for sure, but it's definitely going to require some change in perspective and approach on our part as operators. Rachel, Shelley, anything that you want to add as far as this kind of like big aha moments or learning curves conversation goes?
Rachel, can I jump in for a sec? I think to echo Adam, put it everywhere, you know, like own it. You know, we have it on Resi, on the menu, on our websites, on the check. And then really practicing, I found really practicing in pre-shifts, particularly opening a newer operation and answering the question why. I always say to the team, if you don't, like, you've really got to believe it to be able to articulate it to the guest if somebody asks why. And if you don't genuinely believe that every single person there alongside you is participating in the chain of service, then anything you say is going to fall flat, right? So, you know, our belief is that every hourly employee participates in the chain of service, and therefore it's all distributed back. And so at the beginning, like 2016, it felt like, well, that's what they said. You know, it just felt like there was a separation. And the more people truly understand that nobody's getting food on a plate unless the plate is clean, there's just way more, it's less of a story. It's less of a, I don't read them, but it's like less of a Yelp review, right? Like it just, because it's just fact, everybody participates in it.
Yeah, I would agree with what you've said, and I just you know, the having done it from the beginning versus starting in the middle, I would say it's been challenging transitioning, and you know, what you said, Shelley, about being confident and, you know, believing in it to make it really happen is of the utmost importance. And I think for us, we've been sort of in this state of transition for a number of years. We really started shifting our model in 2020 during the pandemic, and we haven't necessarily landed on what our final model is. And so that, you know, that's been challenging. And so, you know, messaging though agreeably is the way to keep the flow happening, both to the staff and to the consumer. And it doesn't always work, but we can keep trying.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I always say and that I learned in my restaurant, so we had eliminated tipping. We'd done the kind of hospitality included Danny Meyer model where our prices were just higher. And this was, you know, pre-2018 when you weren't allowed to share tips with kitchen staff. But, you know, we had messaging everywhere. It was on our website, it was on our menu, it was on our front door, it was on the check presenter. You could not miss that there was just nowhere to add a tip. And it really wasn't until the guest paid and they received their final tipless check to sign that they said, but where do I leave the tip? And so I think, you know, the person that is going to be answering that question is probably not going to be Adam or Shelley or Rachel. It is going to be whatever employee it is that is handing that final check to the guest. And so making sure that they are your kind of most enthusiastic cheerleader of why you're doing this and why it's important is, you know, I think probably the key to this working. If you don't have that, it's not going to work. And so in that kind of vein, what have you all seen or what have you all implemented in terms of getting those folks on board and getting them excited and making sure that they kind of understand and are able to sort of operate on the front lines of this movement and really get not just their buy-in, but the guests' buy-in ultimately, so that everyone's excited about it. And I'll kind of just let you all jump in if anyone wants to go first.
I think we go at it from the things that you know, from both the sexual harassment and anti-racist directions first. And so there's information there in orientation, and then we partner with a local, with the SAFE Institute to stop abuse for everyone, and do harassment prevention training for all employees, for everyone. And then we also have a partnership with since Raise doesn't do them anymore, we have a partnership with another DEI organization here that does hospitality specific DEI training. I mean, you know, just to make sure that the history of the history of tipping and the history of discrimination in our community is a part of service.
Yeah, I agree with Adam. It's giving everybody that you work alongside all of the data, right? Like where its historical roots come from, where tipping's historical roots come from, what is the subset of behaviors with what has to be the largest amount of sexual harassment in any industry, to just human equality, everybody's participating in the chain of service. And so you can sort of start on one level in the explanation, once everybody you work alongside has that, and then you start in one explanation if there's ever pushback, particularly from a guest, which is we see everybody as participating in your meal experience, right? That's sort of a gentle way to go about it. I have a colleague who will explain from 4 a.m. in the morning till closing how everybody participates. You know, it depends how verbose you want to get, to, you know, going with a very direct gut punch of like, look, these are the roots of it, and this is what you're participating in by not supporting the system that we're implementing. So I think having all of it and meeting the guest or the response where it's at, you know, in terms of how much pushback you get. And to Adam's very first point, is like, look, this is what we do. You have the freedom and the choice to work anywhere you want to in the world, I would imagine, in certain cases, most, well, privileged cases, certainly. And like, you don't have to work here, because ultimately what you're trying to build is build a culture of people who are in it with you. And I know that that's a challenging statement to make in light of where we're at as an industry right now. I'm also not afraid of staying in it until we can staff it. Like I'm not going to look away until this comes right. But I do think it's having all of the information, the data about where tipping began and why some of the grotesque behaviors have happened as a result of this minimum wage. You know, people's survival is depending on that. Somebody's subjective view of them.
Shelley, I think in our conversation, you also mentioned something about an onboarding document that you use with your employees.
Yeah.
Do you mind?
So we try and give obviously we give as much information as humanly possible on onboarding, and describing, like, you know, how their overtime, what their actual rate is, right? So if they're $21 an hour and $5 an hour in MSc, their actual rate of regular rate of pay is 26. Their sick pay, their overtime rate, all of that is 26. They could walk into any other job and say that legally on paper their rate is 26, not 21. But really, through, you know, to echo what Adam said as well, you know, we have a DEI coach, and we did a big survey amongst all the staff about what, you know, what their greatest fears were and around equity. And two things came up. One is fear of retaliation. And so when you have a culture, an industry that's built on fear of retaliation, right? So the sub basis of how people are paid, the basis of how people are paid, has created this culture where leadership or senior leadership are always the power player. It's gross, but fact. And this fear of saying anything for fear of their earnings being compromised. We have a document that we give everybody on onboarding around what retaliation looks like. And we really go deep into, this is what it looks like when somebody's retaliating against you. This is what gaslighting looks like. This is what a microaggression looks like. If anybody you're working alongside, anybody who manages you directly, a guest, a vendor, is using this language with you, is participating in this way with you, this is retaliatory behavior. This is a microaggression. This is aggressive behavior. We own it up front. And then we also have a document around agreements, which is telling the employee that the working relationship is a two-way relationship. It's not a one-way top-down relationship. And that anything like their job description or anything around MSc or sexual harassment policy, all of our policies, that they're entering into an agreement with us, rather than it being a one-sided expectation that they will do something or we will do something and everybody sits back. Sorry, just one other thing to mention, which I think is important for operators based on the way the industry is being built. It was fear of retaliation. It was not knowing how to progress. Those were the two things that they felt, even though I feel like we're super open. Our perception is like, we're really open. We tell you when, oh my God, we would never, you know, all that. The reality is the foundation of this industry has been built on those fear bases. And so any operator coming forward at an interview stage, onboarding stage, first 2-week stage, whatever it might be, with super clear guidelines about retaliatory policies and how they can progress in the company, does seem to provide a sense of safety and security over and above what any work towards wage equality looks like.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I know we're supposed to be answering questions, but do you find that, because I think, that's certainly the goal. Like, and I'm listening to the two of you and I'm like, you guys are amazing. How are you doing all this? We're still building, our onboarding process is in building. We're from just employee wise, like pre-pandemic, we had 140 employees. We dropped down to, 20. And then we've built back up to around 130 and we're still growing. And just particularly with you having multiple concepts, Shelley, I just wonder, it's fascinating to hear that you have all this information that you're giving out to your employees. Do you feel like they're actually receiving the information, not just that, and that you have an effective way to get it to them to understand it? Because I feel like one of the challenges for us is always like, we're doing these great things. We're really we're doing all this on behalf, because for you, our employees, and we are trying to explain to you why, but we don't really know if this is actually all translating or coming through to,
Sure.
and I say that translating both to English speakers and also then the secondary challenge of English second language speakers.
Well, addressing the final point of which you just said, every document we have and every conversation we have is bilingual.
Right.
And we're incredibly fortunate that particularly our HR department, who are extraordinary, are all bilingual speakers. And the majority of our senior leadership. We clearly don't always get it right. I would say the largest and the biggest tie-in or buy-in that we had was when we got to do it with everybody in one go, right? So brand new team, everybody in one go, everybody got to see that play out. That was actually the opening of Gjelina, New York. That was, I think, the easiest because everybody was starting from the same place. I think clearly where the potential for misalignment comes in is when a bunch of newer employees have all of the new data and people who've been there for a lot longer who learned by assimilation as opposed to learn by foundation set out in day one. There will always be that catch-up process. We have 440 employees. And I find what's interesting for me, I described this to somebody, I feel like it's super clear with me, right? Like there's no wavering. I feel like it's super clear with anybody that I manage directly. I have 15 people that report to me. And then I feel like they're super clear with their teams. There's a misstep between line managers and alleys in terms of consistency. And mostly because during the pandemic, they've been like this, right? Like there's not been a huge amount of breathing room in terms of stop, take a breath, make sure that your employees understanding foundational principles, value systems, all of that. That's not to say that that isn't ingrained in that person. It's just that we go into fight or flight when we're in service. And it's about it's about constantly prioritizing and stopping, particularly the newer managers, and being like, stop. This is like, you've got to be more coaching for the longevity of it. But we don't get it right. You know, it's so easy for me to say as the person who's writing the foundational values and principles that this is what we are, and I can go into bat for it all day long. I can't say that that's consistent across all 40 managers in the company, and I own that.
I would agree. I mean, I think part of a couple things. The coalition of restaurants is the reason that we've been able to add as many outside trainings as we have, because we aren't contracting with these outside companies by ourselves, which we could never afford to do. So that's incredibly helpful. And it also means that in a lot of cases, our employees are doing them with the employees of other restaurants. So there's a camaraderie and a community there that they're not the only ones. You know, that there's a sense of trying to change the entire restaurant environment in Austin very, very, very slowly. But at least there's that help. We've tried to through training, we're making sure that just like people know how to make coffee, that people really understand the service charge and all of the politics behind it, or ethics behind it rather, and treat those things the same, and then build it into like the biweekly meetings also, so that if there's a food and a beverage component to the service meetings every other Friday, that there's also some kind of values component to it, so that there's something else that they're learning, so that it's ongoing. It's not perfect. I mean, sometimes, you know, the wine part takes too long, and values get 5 minutes. But that's the goal. But we also, you know, we're also the
I feel like we're kind of scratching the surface here, but just to kind of finish on one question so that we can get to some of this Q&A. You know, I think if we're just talking about wages, maybe this model is not particularly appealing, but I think that we're talking about kind of a fundamental shift in how we approach our restaurants and how we approach these jobs, and really thinking holistically about the employee experience, and again, kind of getting back to what their sort of upward mobility and career trajectory is, and thinking about ways that they're able to use these jobs to sustain a life and a family and plan and all of those things. Can you all kind of, and I know that we're already kind of there, but can you all maybe speak a little bit more to some of the benefits that a service charge model allows you to implement, or sort of extra things that you think have sort of helped accomplish these goals? And I'll let Adam start.
Sorry, let somebody else start, because I heard you say Adam, but I also was frozen for a couple seconds of your question. So
I can start.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's just for us, again, it's just back to being able to, in general, implement the higher wage and work towards the equity. I mean, I feel like we get all sidetracked when we start getting into the conversation, and then sometimes we just have to focus on, like, why are we doing this in the first place? Because we want people to be paid well. And with that, then they can have better lives, and they can, I mean, you know, it's a little simplistic, but ultimately for us, our goal was to really try to help control the wages to get our employees paid as much as possible. I think not to always be the negative one, but just we found it very challenging. And I think one of the things that we have found is that we've actually lost a little bit of control in a way we didn't anticipate. And mostly just in terms of like the pay equity gap at one of our places is really big between the front and back of the house, because of I know somebody asked a question about tips on top, because we do take tips on top, and that challenges the whole system. Tips that we can't share between front and back of the house, because again, we're in Massachusetts where we can't do that. So, but I think overall, again, it's just that trying to help get people paid more and have better lives.
The one thing we do over and above reviewing the percentage splits between back and front yearly and sort of every 6 months actually in certain properties is we also look at every year. Our goal is to pay more of the health insurance. So with each year, we've been able to pay more incrementally, little increments, but more incrementally of the employee's health insurance percentage. And then at certain years, like certain year increments of an employee's life with us, we either cover it fully and or we cover it for them and their families fully, depending on how many years they've been with us. As an addition to looking at something else over and above the wage conversation.
Paid time off is big. I think there are a lot of, again, though, there are, I think a lot of young employees who don't know that matters, who don't understand that that's not typically a thing in restaurants. We pay the full premium for a direct primary care clinic, which is $70 a month per employee, instead of insurance. And we started doing that at the beginning of the pandemic so that we could make sure that people were going to doctors, had a doctor to go to. And again, I think that that's something that a lot of folks have a benefit, but it's really important for the restaurant. We have a mental health subsidy that again works through the Good Work Coalition, so folks can get folks can go to as many sessions as they want with a counselor at this particular clinic for $10 a session, and then the restaurant pays $15 a person. Not nearly enough people take advantage of that, but it's also something that's important to us. So if there's something significant that I'm missing, but I think those are the big couple of things. I was just going to say, if we were speaking to some of the things that I was jumping to the chat. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're going to get into Q&A in just a second. I wanted to quickly address Justin's question. Justin, I'm not 100% sure where you're located, but it was basically around the legality of tip sharing. And I know we kind of brushed on this a little bit, but due to an FLSA ruling in 2018, most states across the United States, as long as you are paying whatever the higher minimum wage is in your state, you are allowed to share tips between kitchen and wait staff. The two exceptions, unfortunately, are in the states of New York and Massachusetts. And so certainly some room for policy change there. And in New York, service charges are also not currently legal. And so to kind of transition us into a little bit of conversation around policy, we have Saru joining us. She unfortunately has to jump off pretty quickly here, so we're going to kind of rearrange the agenda and then we'll get back into Q&A for the last 5 minutes of the call. So Saru, if you'd like to unmute yourself and jump into some legislative updates on behalf of One Fair Wage, that would be great.
Great, and thanks everybody, and sorry to interrupt a great conversation on service charges, but that is actually part of the policy conversation. Can you guys hear me okay? Yep, okay, yes. Great. So the law that Andrea just mentioned, we got passed in 2018, was the result of, a lot of organizing and working with workers and employers and Congress members to get a bill passed in 2018 to make it so that you can share tips with back of house workers. There are actually 3 states that have state law that supersedes that: New York, Maine, and Massachusetts. And in New York and Massachusetts, everybody knows we are moving legislation to both raise the minimum wage and allow for tip sharing, so that goes away. That's allowed everywhere. We are going through this incredible moment of the Great Resignation. I am speaking to you from the airport in San Diego, where very, very weirdly, I was asked to keynote at basically the chain restaurants beverage conference vibe. I really was walking into a lion's den, but they were in a moment of such extreme crisis, the chains can't find any people to work, bars don't have enough people to work, so they asked me to come speak. And so as a result of this moment of staffing crisis, we are seeing a lot of momentum around legislation. So many of you know we won one fair wage in Michigan last year. It will go into effect next year. We won one fair wage on the ballot in DC in November. That will start going into effect in July. And then this year we have legislation moving in 10 states to raise wages and end some minimum wages. New York, Maryland, Massachusetts, Connecticut, where it seems very likely to pass this year, Illinois, Rhode Island, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Colorado, and California, which already has one fair wage, but we're moving legislation to raise the minimum wage and the last minimum wage for incarcerated workers. So 10 states where legislation, 9 states where legislation is moving to end the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, plus California, and then 4 states moving ballot measures next year. Arizona, Ohio, Idaho, and Michigan are all going to have measures on the ballot to raise the minimum wage and end sub-minimum wages for tipped workers with disabilities and youth. And so in this year, really the focus for us is these legislative states, particularly states where we think it could really pass. New York, where, as I said, the bill is to both raise the minimum wage and allow for tip sharing with the back of the house and provide forgivable loans for any restaurant that wants to go to one fair wage immediately rather than waiting for the phase-in. Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland, New York, Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Colorado are 6 states where we're seeing a lot of momentum on the issue, great progress, and we'd like to work with all of you to get these bills across the finish line, if not this year, then next year. So in all of these states, there are hearings coming up. There are committee hearings coming up in Maryland on Thursday. There are committee hearings coming up in Connecticut next Thursday. And so, we really hope that we can reach out to all of you in your respective states to help move those bills. And then apart from all those state fights, I did want to share that there's just such incredible outrage around the article that I'm sure you all saw in the New York Times that we instigated with leaked information we got a couple of years ago that the National Restaurant Association had basically been running a scheme for the last 10 years of going around getting states to pass laws requiring food handler training, and with ServSafe, their company being the monopoly food handling training company, then reaping those dollars from those big states and using them to fight against all of us and against worker wage increases. So the Congressional Progressive Caucus is actually holding an event, a briefing next Thursday to hear from workers and employers about how outraged everybody is around this scheme, and then to pursue investigations, IRS, Federal Trade Commission, Department of Justice, and other investigations into this scheme, because there's a lot of illegalities involved with it. And our hope is then to bring it to states. California is moving legislation to change it so that employers pay for the training, not workers, and that all of the training providers are published on the Department of Health's website with the costs associated with them. So there is a lot of momentum both to advance a full minimum wage in multiple states, to allow for tip sharing, and to kind of expose the Restaurant Association for its many years of lobbying against these issues. So we'd really love to work with all of you on any of that.
Thank you so much, Saru. Getting back to the Q&A, and I think this definitely kind of touches on some of this policy stuff as well, partially because I know Shelley is pressed for time and has to jump off soon here, and I'm super happy to kind of stick around if folks want to keep kind of going through some questions, even if some of our panelists have to jump off. I definitely think that I talk about this stuff frequently enough that I have a general sense of what's kind of happening. And I know that there's also a lot of folks in our audience who have implemented service charges. If we want to kind of keep this conversation going, I'm super happy to do so. But Shelley, the question for you is whether or not, considering that you have locations in California versus in New York, where service charge isn't allowed, obviously, unfortunately, your time in New York was cut slightly short. Unfortunately, Shelley's restaurant had a fire and is currently closed. I think less than 2 months in operation. Is that? But I think basically the question is sort of the difference that you've noticed in internal team culture, especially as it relates to that kind of like gap between front of house and back of house in these sort of two different markets with different parameters.
I would be naive to say what I want to say, because the restaurant was only open 30 days before it burnt, right? So Gjelina's almost 15 years old in LA. So the camaraderie between back of house and front of house is significantly more palpable than it was in New York. And I can't say if that's because, I can't at this point say that that's because of the way that people are paid, or if it's because they just didn't know each other as well, right? But I certainly think that Justa and GTA, there's a very strong participation between floor and kitchen. They both have open kitchens. There's no wall divide between them. It's there's way more communication that's happening kind of consistently. It's one of the reasons why we opened up the kitchen, was full transparency. But I would be hard pressed to absolutely say categorically that the more camaraderie in LA, I couldn't specifically say it was because that they're actually all sharing a mandatory service charge. But I just think that there's such a human element to it in terms of the kitchen knowing that their pay is coming from a system that is shared, as opposed to it being traditionally one-sided, or only one group of people who've traditionally been the more privileged of the group anyway, getting access to a far greater sum of money. I would have to have a restaurant in New York open for longer than 30 days to really get the data on that one.
And then Jason Hamill here is asking about kind of payroll costs and what this sort of actually looks like as a line item on your profit and loss statement. He's saying we're at 48% on a good day. Without the tip line, this would 100% not work in a city like Chicago. Tips are bringing in an additional 5 to 6% on top of the 20% we are charging. Anyone want to comment on actual kind of payroll costs as far as this system is concerned?
I mean, you're paying payroll taxes on it, but for us, I don't consider it a line in my P&L. Like, it's money coming in, but it's money going straight out again. I don't look at it as revenue. I don't treat it as revenue. It's treated as revenue from sales tax, and it's treated as revenue from payroll tax, but I don't look at it, I don't consider it as part of my net sales when I'm analyzing my business.
The service charge?
Yeah, the service charge.
Well, you're distributing it out like a tip, like in lieu of a tip, right, Shelley?
Right. Some people do leave tips on top, but I think Adam said yours is like 4% over and above.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think ours is slightly less than that. But certainly, of course, the financial impact on the company is payroll taxes and sales taxes are higher, and overtime rates, of course. But I certainly don't regard it as income because it's going straight out the door again. We're not holding on to it.
Right, we have that mixed system. So in 2 of our locations, like you, Shelley, it just comes in and then goes right back out. But at one of our concepts, we are taking it in as income, and we have it as a line. It's a separate line on the P&L. But that's only we're just under a year into it, so we're still trying to figure out how that all works together and plays in. I think it's interesting also, Jason, you said in terms of labor budget, I mean, we've always struggled with labor as an issue in our businesses, even from long before service charges, and this certainly has challenged it more. I'm again like astonished that you're keeping a 30 to 32% labor in Austin over there, Adam. That's impressive. It's certainly, having this system in place has continued to challenge us on labor. But it's also because we're in transition for the past couple of years, it's also really forced us to hone in more and continue to work on trying to tighten everything up.
Thank you so much, Shelley.
Bye, Shelley. Safe travels.
Seth, I know that there's been kind of a lot of back and forth within the chat. I don't know if you feel comfortable coming off of mute just to see if you have still some lingering questions that we can kind of address.
I do, and I apologize. I have to jump off for another call, but thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just somebody's just kind of starting out in the owner class, but we're planning to implement this kind of model because we have to find a way to make this work without going back to sub minimum. It's, you know, the legacy and slavery and everything. There's got to be a way to make it sustainable, especially for the kinds of concepts where guests want to see that they're on the vanguard and kind of, you know, they want to contribute to these things. I really apologize. I have to drop off, but love the discussion. Thank you so much for making this happen.
Let me just say quick, Seth, I know even beyond Adam and I know there's other people on this call that we've been on calls with before that have been doing this for a while. So I think use Andrea and the resources at Raise to like get in touch with us and get our emails or get our phone numbers, and like we're happy to talk through the issues we've had one-on-one and help troubleshoot.
Yeah, I think one of the, especially if you're kind of just starting out, you know, I do a one-on-one wage model training because this is not one size fits all. This is one size fits one. And I think only you will know what could potentially work for your business and your market with your sort of employee demographic. And so please do reach out to me directly. I just dropped my email in the chat. We also have a page on our website at highroadrestaurants.org that you can sign up for a one-on-one wage model training, and we can kind of walk through some of this stuff together, and then hopefully, you know, depending on kind of where you're at in your process, might, you know, be able to introduce you to someone in your market, or at least kind of with a similar concept, who can sort of also testify a little bit to what their experience has been like. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah. Well, I think there are two things that are hanging out in the chat that go together. Margaret's question about why not hospitality included, and then the question from earlier further up the thread about value perception, and that's the big thing, is that we're already there's already going to be folks, and people are mostly just going to look at your menu, no matter how much you message it. Even if you're, you know, unless your restaurant is called, we include everything in the price of the item, so you don't have to tip or pay sales tax, which is not a great name for a restaurant. So it's really hard, and people are then going to still, the folks who still complain about value perception, I don't really worry about them too much. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that they complained about the size of portions 20 years ago, or the quality of the ingredients, or whatever it is. You know, somebody who's going to complain about value, that's so subjective, and you can't, if they're going to complain because they think that service was bad, and you included a 20% service charge, so service should have been, it's too hard to get in their head. So, you know, we serve the amount of food that we think we should. I try not to bludgeon people with it. I mean, I'm definitely we're pretty understanding, and we will do a lot to make sure that people are happy, and that they understand why we do what we do. But I think that we would not give ourselves that opportunity to even have them in the restaurant if we were just including everything in the price. I mean, people would not come. People, $30+ pasta would not fly in Texas.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what it would be.
I'll say from experience, I used to work for Danny Meyer's group. I was, an early adopter of hospitality included, no tipping. And at the time, especially in Los Angeles, service charges really were pretty controversial. People were pissed off about them. They did not like these like additional kind of nickel and dime charges, as they were called. I think that rhetoric has changed really dramatically. But, from my vantage point, hospitality included was amazing for my staff. They really liked it, especially I think because of our location. We were close to the Staples Center. And so there was just a lot of like instability. A Monday would outsell a Friday and no one really understood why. And it was just like totally unpredictable. But from a guest perception standpoint, it was impossible. Our biggest menu price increase was $3. And like Yelp reviews over this one particular dish, which is our biggest price increase of $3, tanked, and literally nothing about the dish changed aside from the price tag. And so I think that part is really, really challenging and really hard to overcome still, even 7 years later. The other thing that I will say is that we eventually reverted from hospitality included, no tipping, to going back to a tip model, but being able to share between kitchen and wait staff, which back in 2016 had been illegal, was legalized. And as I kind of started to crunch some numbers, one of the things that I realized, which still angers me to this day, is that if I instead just paid whatever the minimum wage in California was and shared tips across both, every single one of my employees would get a raise, and the restaurant would spend less money. And that's a result of the way that payroll taxes and workers' comp and overtime are calculated when you're paying out a wage versus when you're paying out a tip. And so, do what you will with that, but it was an incredibly frustrating realization. And I think, again, comes back to policy and some of the things that make this conversation inherently challenging in our industry.
Bummer ending, Andrea.
Yeah, right. Go forth and figure it out.
I mean, it kind of is,
Go ahead.
it is sort of a bummer though, because if we could just charge what we needed for food and pay people what they needed to be paid and, do our job and then close our doors and go home and then come back the next day and do it again, that would make a lot more sense. Right? I mean, it feels like it doesn't have to be this difficult. That's the challenge. That's really like, it could be so much easier.
I also wanted
just to bring it down a little bit more.
I also just wanted to check in with Jason. I know he's kind of going back and forth in the chat a little bit too. And I know adopted a service charge model basically during the pandemic when they reopened at Lula Cafe in Chicago. I don't know, Jason, if you have anything you want to kind of say or feel like hasn't gotten touched on.
I'll end. I mean, I'm very committed to this and it is working. It's just a lot of work and it's more than anyone should really have to do. And when I talk to people in other industries, I just realize like what an uphill struggle we have right now. But ours is working. I wouldn't go back, but I would say it's when I first implemented, another friend I have who has a lot of restaurants said that I was crazy because he's got a 3%, whatever it was, like a COVID surcharge or a health insurance surcharge. And then you just look at it all as income, like 20% tips roughly is what you're bringing in to pay for your staff. He's like, so I'm getting 23% and you're going to get 20. So you're leaving 3% on the table. And I thought about that a lot at the time. And now that's why one of the reasons we decided to keep the tip line. We have a lot of messaging about how we think about service fees, why we made the decision, it's bright, it's bold, it's everywhere. And then we haven't had any problem, but what we have had is tips, and that's an additional 5 to 6%. So we're actually beating this guy who told me not to do what I was doing because we were going to leave 3%. Well, he's leaving 3% on the table is the way I'm thinking about it. So I feel like I'm winning, but it's a real hard win. And, we're not doing as well as we did before the pandemic, but we are here and we're going to make it work. So I'm really happy to be part of this community and want to share ideas. I do think like the tax issue is unfair and like maybe we should be fighting for some changes, but we're very small voices, I know. Anyways, nice to see you all, and Godspeed, whatever.
Thanks so much for joining us, Jason. Great to see you. All right, any final closing thoughts, burning questions?
I'll just say something positive and reiterate that we are, we're all working in this together. And
Tuning in
so
on a
it's
Tuesday.
what?
I tuning in for a Tuesday afternoon service
Yeah.
charge conversation is how we get this done.
Right. So just, having this nice community is incredible, and we'll just keep plugging away and, relying on each other and learning from each other, and just keep working to make this change.
Adam, anything?
No, I'm looking at the last couple of the extra notes in the chat here. Transparency with customers, transparency with employees. I do think back to the value conversation. I remember the complaints more. You always do, but we get way more praise from customers at this point, and people who are coming back. Nobody's going to come back because of how we pay. Obviously, it still has to be the food, but if there are people who have read about our labor policy somewhere and come in because of that and then love the food, they come back and they say over and over again, great food, and it's so great that they take care of their people, or whatever comment. So the positives have far outweighed. And again, I know we're in a place where the bar for being progressive is a lot lower than in New York and Chicago and Seattle, but yeah. I'm sorry, I just saw another next note.
Yeah, I think that this is like something that we've implied kind of throughout the course of this conversation, but this is definitely a long game play. I think any employee who just wants to take some quick cash home in their pocket is not going to be exactly the right fit for what we sort of are envisioning for our industry here. And I think sometimes in terms of just like the benefits, it really takes years to see kind of the fruits of this labor, and the employees who kind of really get it because they've either applied for a loan for the first time or needed their health insurance because they had a health emergency, or whatever crisis or sort of life event happens, the kind of aha moment in which it clicks that oh yeah, this actually is better, isn't usually something that happens in those first few months of their employment. And so really thinking about it from that vantage point as well. The one other thing that I'll kind of say and close on, obviously, if you haven't noticed, I love to geek out on all of this stuff, have these conversations. So please, please, please reach out to me anytime you want to chat. I'm also just particularly interested in how policy can help support us as independent restaurant owners. And obviously, there's a component of one fair wage to that, but I think that there are so many other pieces to this puzzle as well. And it's definitely something that I personally am like continuing to navigate and trying to figure out and get my arms around. I'm pursuing a policy fellowship here in California. And so if there's ever anything that you want to talk about from that vantage point as well, kind of in regards to policy and tax policy and some of the things that you think make it really difficult for you to be successful, please, again, reach out. I would love to chat and kind of continue to figure out how we forge a path that, you know, helps us be successful so that we can be better employers. I really think that's kind of what we're all after here. So I really appreciate everyone joining us, and of course to our panelists who spent, you know, an hour and a half here today just dissecting all of the things that are great and painful about this. I really, really appreciate everyone's time. So thank you all so much. Please keep in touch, and we'll see you next time.